anovhura meso, anovhura nzeve, anogaya marigi.
Right, 31 July 2022, and I'm joined by my usual guest on Sundays, President Manyara Erin Mienziwa of the Forest Party. How are you, President?
I'm doing very well, Gambakwe. How are you yourself?
Fantastic, and you're looking very presidential. I'm sure everyone is appreciating.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so today we're going to have a very, very quick discussion, and this is obviously about your life, about your plans for Zimbabwe, about your education, your family life. But before we start, I want to quickly ask you about something very, very pertinent. Last week, you mentioned that you are interested in the female or women's rights.
Yeah.
And this week, we saw a very sad situation that occurred in Harare.
Yeah.
This was the murder of Samantha by her boyfriend, Boss Pangolin, in Harare, a dealer, a prominent dealer.
Yeah.
So that Samantha Rumimbo Zapata, who was killed by Tafazo Raso Murengwa, she was shot dead after she tried to break up with him. So I want to look at it from as a president of a party. What would you say about the prevalence of guns in Zimbabwe at the current moment? What is happening? Why do we have so much gun crime now?
Well, that is actually a worry. I think if you're looking at perhaps the loopholes that are within the country right now, because if you remember a long time ago, I don't think even right now as we speak, Zimbabwe does not allow just any member of the public to own a gun or have access to a gun, unless if you own some sort of business, that requires some sort of, cash security. I think transfer of cash from one place to the other. And as well, I think if you own a farm, I think, there is the Firearms Act, that has got quite strict, rules as to the prerequisites, if I can say, of who should own a gun. So I think if you're looking at this case, I think that there is the worry there that, how are people having access, to guns, and so forth, in a country, whereby any ordinary citizen is not allowed to own a gun. So there, I think we need tight and strict rules, I think in regards to our customs area, and see, how we can limit, the importation or exportation of guns, within our societies. So that is a factor, that the government has got to look into and see what loopholes are there at this point in time in the country that are allowing people to, have access to guns or transportation of guns or exportation of some whatever sort, for the ordinary person, to own a gun. With that as well, if you're looking at linking it to the gender issue, you do have limited opportunities, like I said, limited opportunities, to influence policy with the legal, cultural, and patriarchal nature of the Zimbabwean government. So with that, this issue should be one issue that should actually influence policy direction. I think influence on more stricter measures that are put in place so that circulation of guns, to those who are not supposed to be owning guns or have access to guns, should not be enhanced in some sort of way. So with that, it's actually the Zimbabwean government, that has got to look into such loopholes so that we can actually deter, such crimes from occurring in the first place.
Okay, President, I think it's very, very clear. A very sad situation. The young lady who was killed had tried her best to break up with this guy. And I think women's organization, I haven't seen them really speaking up. I don't know whether there are women's organizations in Zimbabwe or what is happening, because it seems like they don't step up when it's necessary to either support or against. They just keep quiet. We used to have very vocal women's organizations in Zimbabwe, and I think maybe the political parties like yours, which are led by a woman, can also assist in that situation, because this young woman had done everything. She had gone to the police, she got a protection order, she ran away from the guy, everything. She tried everything. But it seems like a young female cannot be safe if a perpetrator tries or really wants to go after it. And it's very sad that 2 young people are dead. Tafad's got 29 and Ruvimbo, 28 years old. She was buried today from my understanding. But President, let's move on. Let's quickly do this. And I want this to be very, very short. Let's look at yourself. You want to be the first female president of Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Let's start with your qualifications. Why do you think you qualify to be the president of Zimbabwe?
I think if you're looking at it from a qualification point of view, it's not because of a qualification. I think it's the interest that you have from my own point of view, the interest, I think the measure of myself in actually taking over this job, because it's not an easy job, leading a country, and as well, like you said, being a woman, that does not give me a very good, outlay in terms of reaching up such heights to be accepted, especially in African countries. So with that, it's something that actually gives you some sort of a push, a really strong push, for you to be heard, for you to be seen, for you to be recognized, because we are the same as any other person out there, whether it be male, female, whichever way you're looking at it. I'm looking at it from a mental point of view and the intellectual ambience. Like I always say, I don't think the intellectual ambience is quite discriminatory, in the sense that, if you're a woman, you've got a lesser, understanding of intellect and so forth. So with that, if I look at myself, I'm looking at the right qualifications, that I have in maintaining and looking after, this job. It's not an easy job. Like I said, I think that's where so many people do fail, because they go into it, I think, with just the idea of wanting to be a leader. There's a lot that comes with it. You're looking at, I think, probably your trajectory in terms of governance. And governance does not necessarily mean political governance. It's actually governance in business. If you look at it, I think if you're running a country, it's an organization in itself, and it's some sort of a business entity that you've got to look after on a very large scale. So if I look at myself, with the trajectory that I have in running a business. I've been running a business for nearly 12 years now, which has been very successful, and something that I have done within a short space of time in raising the business itself and multiplying it and finding it, reaching out to so many different areas from where I started. I'm now looking at a multi faceted business that I'm running as I speak right now. So there is a tester, or some sort of a litmus test within myself that, how I can look after, a country, like Zimbabwe. And as well, I think the background that I have in terms of understanding, politics, through studies and through engagement of different platforms, I think overseas and, local to Zimbabwe as well. I'm looking at the qualifications that I have had in understanding the political networks, from a localized, point of view and international point of view. I do have, such credentials, that cover both areas of looking at Zimbabwe and studying Zimbabwe, the history of Zimbabwe. I think looking from where we got the independence, I've got all that information, that I did study and try to understand, because you've got to understand understand the history of a country for you to find a resolve for it in the future. So that is the advantage that I have in understanding, what happened, from the liberation struggle to where Zimbabwe is now. I've got an understanding of that trajectory from, 1975, how Zimbabwe was to when we got the independence. I think I'm looking at the economic aspect of Zimbabwe. I did study that and looked into that in very much a detailed aspect into, when we took over power, what happened, from the negotiations within the Lancaster House Agreement itself, and with us, coming on to take power, and the economic impact, that it had, with us taking over power. And from then on, I think, understanding why we had the economic structural adjustment program, and then the issues that we had, of a repressive, economy, to now, where we are. So I've got a very good trajectory in understanding in depth, about the history of Zimbabwe. And then if you're looking at it from the political aspect, this is when I'm moving away from the economic, aspect. I've got a good understanding of what is politics, what is understood, when we've got like a conflict in Zimbabwe, because I've looked into all such different studies of conflict resolutions, primarily looking at things like the truth and reconciliation, whether it applies in so many different forms of different countries, and why it was done in some other countries, why not in some other countries, and like the issues of the Nuremberg trials, and looking at it with the conflict resolution from the truth and reconciliation, how it differs, from one to the other, and as well, looking at international organizations, how we can use international organizations, like the United Nations itself and its many different facets within that, what's applied in terms of resolutions aspect, and those resolutions that have been applied by the UN, those resolutions, that have never worked, and those that have worked, how they've been applied, the reason why they've been applied, the reason why they have not worked, in terms of, looking at, peacekeeping and peace building and things like that. And I looked at things like how we can look at the EU and its organs as well, and looking at it from Zimbabwe's point of view, how we can have, bilateral relations from an economic point of view, trade relations with the EU. It's, multifacets of how the hierarchy of the EU is made, so that you can understand, how you can communicate and liaise, with such a union on a grand scale. And as well, I've looked at issues like diplomacy itself, with the course that I did in terms of the United Nations, and looking at diplomacy, economics, politics, and international relations. So these are the facets, that I carry. These are the experiences that I have. These are the qualifications that I have in understanding the Zimbabwe problem, and trying to apply all these things, with my knowledge of, how important international relations is for Zimbabwe in trying to rebuild lost relations, whether it be political relations, whether it be economic relations, and as well the importance of re-engagement, of such things whereby we need to improve, our bilateral relations, with other different countries. So I do have that experience of diplomacy and how we can re-engage with other countries, and as well the understanding of issues pertaining to resolve, and the reasons why policy is important, for a country, legislation as well, why it is important, for a country. So it's all these things, that I have in my background, in how I can run the country of Zimbabwe.
Right, President, I think we need to break down a few things. I understand at the high level what you just said. So let's break down. When we say we've got President Manyara Irene Mienziwa, take me through your early years from the beginning.
Yeah.
Where were you born?
Goodness, a long time ago. Yes, I was born in Zimbabwe, Harare. I grew up in Highfields to start off with. And then from there, I attended Rushingo Primary School. Then from Rushingo Primary School, I went on to St. John's Boarding School. Then from St. John's, I went on to Marlborough High School, where I did my A-levels. And then from there, I think when I left Zimbabwe, that was the time, I think, when we were just starting to face, the economic, hardships. This was, late 90s, early 2000s. This is when I left Zimbabwe and then searched for greener pastures. Greener pastures, I think, in terms of, sort of like finding a broader spectrum, where education was concerned on a very higher level. So I went to the UK, where I became a biomedical scientist, so I'm a scientist, by profession. And then I studied, the diplomacy degree, master's degree as well. So those are the two facets, that I have, if you were to look at me. So I've got that scientific background, and then I've got the political, diplomatic, background in how I'm gonna, have an outlay of applying, these experiences, that I have, to Zimbabwe. So with that, I went on to formulate, my own business in care, which is health and social care in Zimbabwe. I do run care homes as well for young adults, who've got, mental health as well as, health issues. So the sort of clients that I have got a dualistic, aspect in terms of the ailments, they have, whether it be mental ailment, whether it be a health ailment. So I do run, care homes, young adults, from the age range of 18 to 65, from anybody who's got, mental health issues or learning disabilities issues. So you can have the dual aspect I'm talking about is somebody who's got a mental health, like it can be paranoia or that sort of thing. It can be schizophrenia, but then as well another the dualistic aspect of having a health ailment. It can be they've got diabetes, with that. It can be that they've got renal failures. It can be that they've had cancer in the past, and those that I take, are in sort of like sort of recovering, from cancer, itself. So that's the dual aspect I'm talking about, the mental health issue as well as the health aspect. So I come in on the health aspect, that's when, I look after and administer, my experience. And then I've got managers, psychologists, you name it, doctors of all different, backgrounds, whether it be psychology, health itself, different, aspects of which, helping people, with their cognitive, issues and so forth. So this is a business, that I run, on a very large scale in the UK. So here I am. And then from there, I went on to formulate, a political party, which is the Freedom of Rights, under Sovereign. And here we are as we speak right now.
Okay, that's amazing. And I think many people did not know that you're a scientist and a biomedical specialist.
Okay.
So I think we'll go into that another time. But I want to look, obviously, at a bit more at your career in Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm.
Because what I've realized, many people who left Zimbabwe,
mm-hmm.
they then went away and they don't have the understanding of Zimbabwe.
Mm-hmm.
What is the problem in Zimbabwe right now?
The Zimbabwean problem. The problem in Zimbabwe is an issue of the lack of, I think, democracy in Zimbabwe. If you look at it, if I can just perhaps explain that one in detail, not just the lack of democracy. You do have two countries in one country. So you've got the old order, or the older people, of which they've got an archaic take to the issues around Zimbabwe. And then you've got the younger citizens, who are much more on a democratic path, and they've got a democratic view, of which I think these two different eras are in conflict in terms of finding that homeostatic balance. Sorry, I'm just using my biomedical scientific terminology. The homeostatic balance that needs to be found within the old order and the younger or new order. So that conflict between the old and the young is something that we have as a problem, whereby I think the the way Zimbabwe actually got its liberation, it got its liberation through a fight for democracy. But then when that fight for democracy was realized, and there was an accession to power, from our old order, they carried on, I think, with a repressive, approach of the old order, of those, that they took the liberation from. So whether you look at it from a psychological point of view, that, sometimes, like they say, I think the abused, becomes the abuser. You've got that aspect in Zimbabwe within the old order, whereby the relinquishing of powers has become so difficult, for them to actually capitulate and actually take it on and have the understanding or the acceptance or the trust, that if they're to relinquish these powers to the new order, which is the younger citizens of Zimbabwe, we can have a functioning nation that is actually has got this homeostatic balance and actually has a better trajectory, I think, of an economic, liberation that we want to see at this particular point in time. So if you are to have a cross-generational approach to the Zimbabwean problem, you'll find that, it will lessen, all these issues, that we have of people trying to hold on to power, having this issue of not wanting to relinquish, these powers that they've taken over from another repressive regime that they fought the liberation for. So there, I think you've got the the younger citizens questioning the old order to say, okay, if you took this country from a repressive regime, how come is it that, we are finding you as Black natives of Zimbabwe oppressing other Black natives of the same country? Because we fought for the country, I think, with the liberation struggle, which is the thing that they say is very emblematic of them, of which we do accept and we do understand that, they did fight for liberation struggle. But then which country across the whole world can you go into that doesn't have a history of fighting for liberation? So that doesn't make Zimbabwe, a lonesome country or a lonesome dove on its own to say, we are the only country in the world that has fought for liberation. If you visit any other country, you do find every country has got a history to tell of oppression. If you're looking at it, from how the Romans, oppressed the whole country when they were trying to get into this empirical stretch of how they can actually control, the whole world, of which they did find in the end that, you cannot, have control over the whole world. And which is an understanding that perhaps, the current ruling party of Zimbabwe has got to understand. There comes a time whereby you cannot rule forever. Those who came in and fought for liberation will die in the end. We've got to have new people who are going to carry on with the torch. Now, the thing that we want right now is not the liberation struggle. The economic struggle is the fight that we have in our hands. Because what you're finding now is that there is not a time whereby each country is now looking at, okay, will there ever be a time whereby we're going to have military war? The war that we have right now as we speak, never mind, the issues that are happening in other, countries, like Russia, the Ukraine war and things like that. But then the war that we're fighting right now is the economic war. Where is it in our country? Do we find where we can place ourselves, the leverages that we have as a country, and placing ourselves in looking after our natives, our citizens, which is what the old order is missing. When you go into power, you become a mother to your people, to look after your people, to look after your citizens, whereby I think the younger order is not understanding, why is it that, a liberation struggle, if it's well spoken about and if it's in remembrance each and every year, why is it that we cannot experience this liberation that those who claim to have fought it for are repressing the younger order that is trying to push the country in the right direction, where the economy is concerned?
Okay, so I don't want to go deeper into what you just said because I want to keep this very, very focused.
Yeah.
I asked this question before, and I want to see how different your answer is.
Yeah.
To other presidents. if you were to be president today, what are the first things that you do in the first year of your presidency to fix the problems in Zimbabwe? The economic, the political, the social problems we have in Zimbabwe, the polarization, the sanctions. Please focus on the sanctions. We've got serious sanctions in our country. Let's see, what are you going to do in the first year to fix those 5 issues?
Yes, I've got so many things, that I'll need to focus on. If you look at the problems that we have, what I will have is a firm commitment, to the rule of law. I think the respect to property rights, and as well the independence, of the judiciary, the parliament, and the ruling government. Those are some of the things that I'll straight on, put in place. And the focus that I'll have is in restructuring. As I'm doing that, I'll be resizing the government, restoration of the rule of law, respect of property rights, like I've said, devolution, independent judiciary, and an advanced, technology. Those are the things that I'll look into, because what you find is that if we're to remove the current government that you have there, you've got a new government, like the For Us government, that is free from any conflicts, if I can say, from other international players, and from the local natives, as well. So For Us party is a new, fresh party that has got this economic transformation agenda, whereby we need to equate, the all Zimbabweans, so that they've got free access, to health, free access to fair wages, free access to all the things that they want to experience, within the social democratic manner that we need to see our Zimbabwe, come up to as I speak right now. So what we need to see there is the economic transformation is something that I will need to put in place. I'm not going to be talking about sanctions, because as soon as the For Us party comes into power, you'll find that the sanctions that we have are targeted sanctions. We've got to keep that in mind. These are targeted sanctions that we have. They are not sanctions, that have been imposed on the economy of Zimbabwe. Because if you look at these sanctions, I think you've got the mainly the West. If you're looking at perhaps the Europe, and if you're looking at perhaps the United States, of America, the targeted sanctions that you have, they are sanctions, whereby they've been imposed on ammunition. The transfer or buying or export or importation of ammunition from these particular countries, between Zimbabwe and the West and the United States. But Zimbabwe is allowed to trade, with any other country. It can trade with America. As I speak right now, it can trade with Europe. It can trade with Russia. It can trade with China. It can trade. So we need to understand, when we talk about sanctions, they are targeted sanctions. So if For Us party comes into power, we are going to introduce, re-engagement, and trying to come up with a dualistic approach whereby it's an inclusive way of looking at, how we can re-engage ourselves, with all different, 4 corners of the world, in using the leverage that we have in the 3 economic tools, like I've always said, that is mining, tourism, you're looking at agriculture as well. And then you're looking at, digitalization, and I'll throw it in there. So these are the things that I'm going to start, putting in place. So don't worry about the sanctions, because if For Us party comes into power, it's a party that is new, that is fresh, that doesn't have any conflicts with any other international players, out there. And our policies are speaking to all these different international players. I'm sure you did see that, in our agenda that we did put in, we talked about especially the removal of sanctions through re-engagement, through, I think, tailor-making, policies in a way that are inclusive, tailor-making policies, that are putting Zimbabwe in a much better leverage, where the economy is concerned. We're looking at a progressive approach towards the resolution, of past injustices, to ensure that, all the Zimbabweans, achieve, a closure. When For Us comes into power, we will make an inclusive and as well, all these issues, when it comes to gender, approach and so many things, I'm trying to incorporate, everything that we've been discussing, to the whole of this discussion, looking at it from a holistic point of view. So the policies that we have actually speak to the new Zimbabwe. a new Zimbabwe, whereby all these conflicts and repressions that you find within the current ruling party are going to be a thing of history. Because a political party like for us has got a new, like I said, transformational agenda that is inclusive in its nature. If you're looking at our core values, like I said, we're looking at equality. Yeah, we're looking at accountability. We are looking at transparency. We are looking at social justice and so forth. So if you're looking at all these things that we can put into table, for us, party is the party that is emblematic in the way. If you're looking at the future of Zimbabwe, we've got the right direction for Zimbabwe, where politics is concerned, where economics is concerned.
Okay, I'm starting to like it. I'm starting to like For Us Party. It's got the way you're describing it, very, very interesting. I want to end with a few questions. Let's end with the political. So the political question, the last one I'm going to ask you today, is about Gukurahundi.
Yeah.
You talked about restitution and compensation. The people of Matabeleland are deeply divided. They're victims themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They are not agreeing on how to proceed. President Mnangagwa has tried everything. He has tried to put a commission.
Yeah.
He's tried to give the chiefs the responsibility to deal with this difficult topic. Mm-hmm. If you're the president of Zimbabwe, how would you deal with Gukurahundi?
You're looking at national healing there and reconciliation. Like I've said, the truth, the reconciliation is something that I've studied and looked into. But then with that, you're just looking at restoration, of justice, restoration of a social contract, between the state and its citizens. You're not just looking at Gukurahundi, but then in this particular, we are looking at Gukurahundi. The social contract of Zimbabwe, has broken down, severely. There is absolutely no confidence or trust in the state, the government, and its public institutions. If we're looking into this is particularly because the state and its institutions, have got so much inefficiency in looking at how restorations of the social contract should be looked into. So with that, for us, when we come in, we're looking at, how we can speak to the people of Matabeleland and put in place a restoration contract where we're looking at national healing, like I've said, and try and speak to them, hear their voices, give them a platform, whereby if it's some sort of a truth and reconciliation that can be put in place, it's something that I'm quite happy to look into and see how best we can come up with an environment that is inclusive, for people to be heard, for people to voice their emotions of what they went through, for people to find a resolve in trying to, because if you look into this issue, you've got, I think, so many people who don't know, where their relatives are, in terms of, where they died and what happened, they did not find them. So when you've got a situation like that, you haven't got any closure, in people. So the issue carries on all the time. You will have the issue coming up, in so many different forms, in the conflicts, in the way that the economy is being handled, and so forth. So without a proper restorative, justice, there is no way that, we can find, a healing within the people of, Matabeleland. So with that, as for us, what we'll do is put in some sort of rehabilitation, approach to it, and put in as well, any reparations that can be put in place, whether it be a social reparation, where we can perhaps, find a way of bringing those who have been affected and try to find, a resting place, for those who have been affected, and, make that a memorial day, for such people, who have been affected, and as well, try to make it not that it's some sort of an economic, take to it. But if you look at, countries, like Rwanda, for instance, you do have, a place, whereby they had to create some sort of a museum in terms of a memory, of those that they lost in a conflict, manner. It's something that we can look into and see, how we can restore the social contract of the, Matabeleland people, and come up, with a peace, building, or some sort of peacekeeping that is healing in its form, in looking at, finding a resting place, as well as, a social reparation of some sort.
Okay, President, I think that topic is probably the most difficult topic that we will have to deal with in a future episode. We have to sit down and talk, and we might have to go deeper into why our country has not managed to move forward on many, many issues. Gukurahundi, Mrambatsvina, the 2008 violence. There are so many issues that need to be addressed. And I think many people don't understand that these are some of the things holding our country back in terms of unity. I want to go back to you as a president of the party. You currently live in the UK. And your family, where is your family living now? In the UK or in Zimbabwe?
I've got family both in Zimbabwe as well as United Kingdom.
Okay, so would you be able to move if you're to be president next year? There's the election. Are you going to move to Zimbabwe to do your campaigning? How is that going to work?
I think I've already moved back to Zimbabwe because I've been running not campaigns as such, but reaching out to all different rural areas in Zimbabwe, of which I've visited quite a lot of rural areas in Zimbabwe. Could not have done that, if I was not living in Zimbabwe. But it's just that, I do have businesses in UK and businesses in South Africa as well. So these are areas that you'll find I will be visiting, I think, where business is concerned, and trying to see, how I can juggle the two. But I am mainly based in Zimbabwe. But for businesses and so forth, I will have to travel to so many different places.
Okay. Do you think you are safe in Zimbabwe if you continue with your approach that you've taken now? You're saying there are no sanctions. You're saying the problem in Zimbabwe is ZANU-PF. You're saying, well, I'm summarizing for you. You didn't say that in those exact words. But you're basically saying the problem in Zimbabwe is the current ruling party. You're saying that for things to change in Zimbabwe, everything needs to be changed. The leadership needs to be changed. I basically think I'm summarizing this correctly. Are you safe in Zimbabwe? Do you think the current government is inclusive? It's accepting of the opposition? What is your view on ZANU-PF as a government?
If you're looking at ZANU-PF as a government, the inclusive nature of politics, that's where the problem is. I think the one-party state system does not speak to Zimbabwe, because our foundation was not built perhaps on a one-party state. I think that's where the conflict is. Because like I've said, I think when we took over the country through liberation struggle, that there was a one-party state that the current ruling party fought for. So a continuation of that they were refusing for it to carry on is a surprise, like I've said, for all young Zimbabweans. We expected for them to apply the democratic approach for that they fought for. Equal access, to a liberalized and democratized politics is something that we thought we would see. Peaceful and violent-free elections is something that we wanted to see. Presence of a democratic nature in terms of transparency of electoral systems, that must be put in place, and disclosures, around election materials, ballot papers and so forth. These are some things, that the ruling party fought for. But then if they come in and use a decree as a way of oppressing and repressing its own citizens, then you find that it's very difficult for you to say they've got an inclusive nature, whereby, if they fought for freedom, The freedom that they fought for was a democratic freedom that they tested themselves. We would like to see that test of that freedom extended to the younger Zimbabweans by allowing another party perhaps to rule the country so that that democratic aspect of what they fought for can be experienced, and for everybody to enjoy the liberation that they fought for in a much more democratic, outlay. So if they carry on the way they are in a non-inclusive, nature, then people do question, what freedom did we fight for? What liberation are they talking about? Do we really need to enjoy and be in commemoration when it comes to the independence of Zimbabwe? These are the questions that you find as I went around the country. People were questioning the liberation for Zimbabwe. I think hence you've got quite a lot of issues in Zimbabwe whereby nobody wants to take part in politics. The local Zimbabweans that you have there is usually those in the diaspora who do voice quite a lot where politics is concerned. But the local Zimbabweans, I'm sure, I don't need to go further. We've seen quite a lot of, vote apathy. This topic, goes in so many different diversified ways whereby it's asking for a democratic, inclusive outlook, for the current ruling party, asking them, to practice that they fought for, to practice that they really went out of way to find a way to remove the oppressive regime. They did not need to become part of that oppressive regime to the natives of Zimbabwe. We needed to see a different Zimbabwe. We needed to see an inclusive Zimbabwe. We needed to see a democratic Zimbabwe, which is exemplary in its way to show how different it was from the regime that they took the powers, from.
Okay. So I think let's bring it to an end there. And obviously, in the next episode, as we have looked at all these political issues, we've looked at your life in Zimbabwe, in the UK, your business, and we've also looked at your plans if you become president of Zimbabwe. Very, very interested, very, very well articulated. And I think many, many people will be contacting you on your social media platforms, on your website, forusparty.org, on Twitter @forusparty, on email, info@forusparty.org, and on your WhatsApp on +27 26377290721, and on your address here, your offices are in Glenview 8, Harare. So I'm very happy with the discussion that we've had. Next week.
Sorry if I can just correct you there. Our offices are in Belvedere, and it's 4 Kenilworth Road in Belvedere. So I think you might have to update.
Okay. So we have to update this. I don't know. This was what I originally got from your website. So yes. I'll go and we make these changes. And then obviously next week, I want us to go into the economy.
Yeah.
Your economic policy.
Yeah.
What do we do with this economy where young people don't know how to withdraw money from an ATM? There are people now who are 25 years who don't know how to use an ATM in Zimbabwe.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are people right now who are 40 years, 50 years, who have never worked in their life, let alone people who don't know how to start a business.
Yeah.
There are people who don't know that with this cell phone, you can start $1 million business. There's a breakdown, as you said, in terms of the government bodies, trust in government structures.
Yeah.
And things are just not working. We've got everything in Zimbabwe. We've got the minerals, we've got everything. But for some reason, everything is not coming together.
Yeah.
And this is the problem that you're trying to solve. So next week, let's go into your economic policy in detail. What can you do for the people of Zimbabwe to make us not stay here? I don't want to stay in this country at all. Like from here, from South Africa, I want to be living in a mansion in Zimbabwe, but it's just not possible.
Yeah.
So we want to hear your plans for us
next
week. And I really enjoy talking to you. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a matter of creating a caring state, of which, that's what, for us government, we will do. It will place, Zimbabweans at the center of service delivery in every government department, including local authorities and so forth. All those issues that you are saying, will be dealt with, public institutions, including local authorities, will work to serve the interests of the citizens. Like I've said, we will have, citizen participation through consultative policy development and implementation in line with the spirit, of building a highly consulting, state. Consultations are important and will include priorities and the quality of the public services and so forth. So all of those things, if we are to look into that, I'm sure we can create a country whereby, access to service information is made easy, whereby people can learn, how to use an ATM, people can find jobs, and that access to service information coming from the state, local authorities, and all public agencies, that must, oblige to make citizens aware, of their right, to access to all these available public services and so forth. So that's for us, Party for You, in trying to make sure that, everybody is not left out.
Okay. Does your party have a slogan?
Yes, it does. It's so many different languages that you've got there. You've got, for us, that's moving forward. And then you've got, for us, Kukubela Pambili in the Valley. And you've got, for us, Kunembo. And then you've got, for us, Hamba Imberi, if you're coming from Mutare there. And then you've got, for us, Patsogolo. So it's all different. We're trying to accommodate all different languages in Zimbabwe and different dialects that are found, within. So hence the inclusive, approach that for us party is using. And there's all one other thing that I do say within that is I say to the people of Zimbabwe that you are the truth to power, and power belongs to you, the voter. So these are some of the things, that we are saying out to the people of Zimbabwe, that, the truth of power really belongs to the people of Zimbabwe. And they should voice that, through their vodcast.
Okay, President Manyara Irene Mienziwa, is there anything else you want to say before we close?
I don't have, any other thing to say except for, we want to see a Zimbabwe that has got a good government, that has got a good macroeconomic roadmap, that is premised in a way that's adopting and swift enough to implement, bold policies, like we're going to talk next week, about it. We need to have, orthodox, programs that are aimed at achieving economic and transformation through the creation of thriving private sector-led, open and competitive economy with a sound, like I've said, a macroeconomic policy, which you're going to hear us, talking about next week. So please do tune in with us so that, we can reveal to you the macroeconomic policies that we have that are anchored on fiscal discipline, monetary and financial sector stability, that has got a business-friendly environment which promotes both foreign and domestic investment.
All right, thank you very much, President, and good night to everybody.
Good night.
Come back with media. Come back with media. Come back with media. Rocking now. Hatichada kusha imba hatichada kushema basa hatichada kujika nokote shironda hatichada zvipatara zvakafa mabengi hamuna kesh hatichada vanhu havana kesh hatichada hatichade in the next 5 years tinenge papi mukufamba mumwe anongopindura senge papa nenge afa asi kuva ndiyo chete chinu takafamba zvimwe zvese zvakamira kunge kombi isina dhiziri takangogara panzvimbo 1 semota isina mavhiri hapana kuti une plani kuzama ese maskiri kuti mhuri irarame kutsvaga mamwe madhiri izvozvo taramba ndati hatichada izvozvo ndaramba hatichada izvozvo taramba ndati hatichada hakuna zvakadaro ha hatichada hatichada kushaimba hatichada hatichada kushaya mabasa hatichada hatichada kudya nhoko dzezvironda hatichada 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 zvipatara zvakafara mabengi hamuna kesh hatichada vanhu havana kesh hatichada hatichada hatichada
uyo uko kuno abo bano